Good evening and welcome to another edition of Swing State. You know, we've had many candidates for big offices on the show over the past few months, but few jobs affect more people than the superintendent of public instruction. We had Democratic candidate Mo Green on several weeks ago, and tonight we have his Republican opponent, Michelle Morrill. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you born in New Hampshire?
Yes.
Do you consider yourself a Yankee then, as the phrase goes?
I'm a converted Yankee, I guess. I came down here to Charlotte when I was 15, and I went to high school at Charlotte.
South Meck, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then off to UNC Chapel Hill.
That's right.
So you consider yourself, I think you said this publicly, you consider yourself a product of North Carolina's public schools.
Absolutely. Yes, because I had the opportunity not only to graduate, but also go to our public college at UNC Chapel Hill, where I got my BS in nursing.
And we're going to get into some of those, how you got into other issues of public schools later, but you worked as a nurse and lived in Mexico. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, I worked in the neurosurgical ICU at UNC for a time, and then I went to Texas, and I ended up moving there and working in the emergency room there, and then had an opportunity through my church to go on a mission trip to Mexico, and actually met my future husband who was working in Mexico.
Okay.
And we ended up getting married and going down there and spent 4 years, and 3 of our 5 kids were born in Mexico City.
Is your husband American though?
He is.
Okay.
He is.
Also in medical field?
Nope. He's from Texas. He's actually got a finance background from UT Austin.
Okay. That could be some kind of rivalry, couldn't it be?
Yes, it
in
could
sports?
be.
But you also did, you fostered and did you adopt, or you looked to maybe? Or?
We were fostered to adopt parents, but none of the children that we fostered ever went to adoption. They went to family members within, their extended family.
So what does all that experience, working and living slightly for a while in Mexico, fostering and all this, how's it informed who you are and what you believe?
Well, I absolutely believe that children are a gift from the Lord, and I think that our children in particular, we ended up homeschooling our children. My kids have been...
We're going to get into that in a second.
Okay, yeah, we've been either in public, private, or in homeschool, but through foster children as well as my own, I've dealt with children with IEPs and needing therapies and needing different modalities, and so that's kind of where I started seeing...
Because that's the question I imagine you get most often. Oh my gosh, this woman homeschooled. Why the heck would she want to run the Department of Public Instruction? But as you mentioned, you have 5 children. You say you, quote, always assumed your children would, like you, go to public schools. And I guess they did to start. And that changed with one of your children when they started school. Tell me about that situation a little more.
Yes. So my daughter, when she was born, ended up with congestive heart failure. And so she had some learning, just, some developmental issues. And so we put her into the public schools thinking that she was going to be able to get, the services that she needed. But after about 3 years and kind of jumping through things, it just was not connecting. And so I thought, I'll take her home for a year and I'll get her caught up and then we'll put her back in. And then after the year, we ended up actually moving to Colorado, and we were in a very remote county of the lower 48 states, the most remote county. And so we ended up continuing to homeschool, and my boys wanted to come home at that point. And so that's kind of how it started, just as a year by year decision.
But the public schools used to do more specialized work. I think in the 1990s there was this trend to what they call normalize or put everyone together. And that's kind of part of what you're getting at is mainstream. Yeah, exactly. That may not be the wisest idea.
Well, I think that it's great for certain children. It just is really going to depend. The reason it's called an IEP is an individualized education plan. And I think when we have smaller class sizes, when we have the ability to do that and have more direct instruction, I think that's going to benefit everybody. And so there are there's a very large spectrum of people and what their abilities are and what their needs are. And so each one needs to be looked at individually.
You taught civics, history, science, and English in what you call micro schools. I'd never heard that term. You call them midpoints between traditional schools and homeschooling. Are they overseen by the Department of Public Instruction, and is there any certification needed to teach in those?
No, it's actually called a co-op. So what happens is a couple of times a week, you might have heard of a university model school, and sometimes that is you will go to school for 2 days a week and you'll take your courses, and then the other 3 days you do the coursework at home, and then you just have that. But so I taught that in co-ops, which was either a 1 or a 2 day a week entity. And so I was teaching mainly mainly high schoolers with chemistry, biology, civics, and Spanish.
There will be some critics, though, who will say you need more time within the system to understand the system to whether you're going to reform it or just improve it. So what do you say to people who say, well, wait a minute, you don't start running for the top job?
Well, I did run for a school board 2 years ago in Cary.
In Wake County,
in
right.
Wake County, yes.
And I believe you were elected one of 2, or no?
No,
you
I
finished
was
second
not.
in your group.
Yes, I was not elected.
Okay.
Yep. But I have actually been going to school board meetings for the last 5 years, and I've also been meeting with legislators in order to try to improve what's happening in our schools. My concerns dealing with the lack of literacy in math and reading, as well as some of the dangers, as well as a lot of the issues with health and sex ed standards.
Your party already had this office. Catherine Truitt was the state superintendent of public instruction. Why challenge her in a primary?
Because I was very concerned, especially when I'm looking at literacy rates, especially when I'm seeing the fact that the Parental Bill of Rights was a very big deal for our party in particular. And one of the first things that Catherine did was she pushed off the instituting that within the school. She was not ready with policies so that could have started at the beginning of this past school year last August. Instead, pushed it out until January.
We're going to, about a minute left in the segment, but I want to bring in before we go to break. You do want to see teachers be paid more. How much more, and where would that money come from?
I really believe that we have got to start funding our classrooms before the boardroom. So what we need to do is we need to have an audit, a financial audit, to see where our money is going. We have a direct correlation between an increase in our spending and a decrease in literacy, in competency, and so that needs to be examined.
But I mean, do you have what about teacher raises do we need? Do you have a ballpark, 10%, 15%?
You know, I would go, the General Assembly definitely has an idea of what they want to raise that to, and I think we need to look at that and see what can be done. But what needs to happen first is, what I don't want to do is just blanketly tell the people of North Carolina, we are going to raise your taxes. We need to be responsible with what we already have.
Yeah, because they have had significant raises over the last 5 years. The problem is inflation has eaten up almost all that, and they're really only up a couple of percentage points. Of course, many of us are down percentage points, but that's the way it can go.
Yes.
All right, well, a lot more to come tonight, including what Michelle Morrow says is the #1 issue for schools, and it might not be. What you think? Welcome back to Swing State. Tonight we are talking with the Republican candidate for superintendent of the Department of Public Instruction, Michelle Morrow. And you know, school safety is a big enough issue that it gets its own segment on your website. You say that school crime has increased 84% over the last 5 years and list statistics showing there are 40 drug possession incidents in North Carolina schools every day. Find that amazing. And there were nearly 1,500 assaults on school staff in the last school year. That is more than 8 every school day. I know you've called for more in-school resource officers, but is that enough? How do you handle this issue? I mean, you're supposed to be teaching kids, not being a police force.
Absolutely. You know, when I talk about safety, I talk about it from outside of the school. We definitely need to prevent any, tragedies that we've seen around the country. But the other thing is we really need to bring civility and respect back into the classrooms. So we have got to strengthen that bond between teachers and parents and the administrators.
Easier said than done.
It is, but I do believe that when you look at private schools, when we look at charter schools, part of the reason why I think they might have a leg up on us in terms of academic success is because they do have a code of conduct. There is an expectation that the teachers, the students, and the parents are aware of before they ever enter into the classroom.
But the big advantage they have too is they can select their students, or even more than that, their students select them. The students are asking to be there.
That is
They're
true.
not always that way in public schools, and that's where you run into some problems.
Well, and I think we really need to start making our schools be more of a team atmosphere. I think we need to look at it not so much on the individual level. Everybody obviously is an individual, but I think we need to look at it from, if we had the principals being the head coaches and all the teachers and staff or assistant coaches, and then the students are looked at as the athletes themselves, right? When everyone is doing what is best, what is their greatest that they can do, everybody ends up succeeding at the end of the year.
when you were asked what the most important characteristics and principles are for an elected official, you said honesty, integrity, maturity, collaboration with others, and managing conflict. Now that leads to something I am required to ask you about. You're certainly aware that some of your political opponents have unearthed some of your social media posts from the past few years that are, I will have to say, even from a bystander doesn't have a dog in the fight, they're pretty harsh, and they talk about publicly executing some people whom you've seem to have some pretty deep disagreements with. What do you want to say about those posts?
I want to say, first of all, they weren't posts. They were
Okay.
comments made in a comment thread.
Okay.
And were they ill-worded? Absolutely. Was it made at a time when emotions were high and things were said that I could have worded absolutely differently? Totally. I am not a politician. I've never planned on being a politician running for office, but I do believe that we are suffering in our country with a lack of law and order and a lack of justice. And I think that's what that was referring to. But it was said hyperbolically and in sarcasm. It was not intended in the way in which it's been presented.
And that, of course, is always the problem with anything texted or put on social media. It's in print. You can't get any of the nuance. But can you understand how some people in the Department of Public Instruction may be wary of working closely with you after some of those posts? Would you have a problem, for example, with working with someone who said things about President Trump, whom I believe you support?
Yes, I absolutely support
Okay.
President Trump. And I guarantee you that there are people in the Department of Public Instruction and everywhere else that have said things about President Trump and disagree with him. I think that we need to get...
in that vein of those type of hyperbolic, as you mentioned, hyperbolic terms, if someone used those terms about President Trump, like we saw the comedian
Would I
Kathy
be able
Griffin.
to work with them?
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. Yes, I believe we need to get politics out of the classroom. I do not believe that we need politics or political agendas. And these were discussions that were had between adults on a social media thing 4 years ago. And quite honestly, I have to tell you, the people around the state of North Carolina are not concerned about 4-year-old comments on social media. They're concerned that our children can't read or write. They're concerned that teachers are being assaulted. They're concerned that we have a serious drug problem and that our kids are not able to compete in the global marketplace.
Fair
that we
enough.
find
We're going to get
ourselves
into those issues next, including, though, you just brought up too much politics in our classrooms. What are we referring to? Give people an idea of what that means, because everyone hears a generic term and they insert their own meaning. What do you mean by that?
I think we need to get back to the basics of education. I think reading, writing, and arithmetic. I don't think any fifth grader should graduate from elementary school without mastering those three things. I think those are the platform on which all higher level learning is based. And I think we are dividing our children according to the color of their skin, according to their social strata or their parents, and according to their parents' political affiliation.
Or religion on some higher ed campuses, as we've seen lately.
Absolutely.
But what are the top politics that are in there? What are we talking about? Are we seeing things, what is it, mostly in history or social studies?
Yeah, I think CRT is a big issue. I think DEI. I think we need to teach our children that they should be proud of the United States. There are things that we need to address that say, yes, that was a horrible time in our history, but also let's look at where we've come and let's look at what we've learned from it. I think the 1619 Project, as it was removed from the UNC system. It was done rightfully so, and I think we need to ensure that we are promoting true history and true science and true economics. I don't think that our students should believe that socialism is a good method of running an economy, as many are now touting.
Yeah, the younger generation believes in it pretty significantly. It may have just been the heat and the exhaustion of a campaign, but Al Gore famously in 2000 had quoted the nation's motto as from one many, flipping it's from many one. And
yeah.
I think I guess what you're getting at is this idea of we can come from many backgrounds, but we have to find a way to bind ourselves. As not easy to do with 330 million people.
It's true, but I think in our schools, if we will teach our children that everyone is created in God's image, is what I believe, and everyone has something that's a gift or a talent or a passion, and that's what our education should be about, helping each individual figure out what is your gift, what is your passion, and then helping them to get onto a pathway where they can pursue a career in that field.
Well, now that you've mentioned the God, you talk a lot about your faith in God, so I want to make sure people get all this. I don't think people are asking you to become an agnostic or atheist when you walk through the door, but you're not asking people necessarily to embrace faith when they come through the door either.
No, although I will say everyone is allowed to express their faith regardless of what it is in terms of the students in the school. There is, we have the religious freedom in our country, and so that is one thing that I would want anyone, regardless of what faith they believe in, for our children to be able to express that through, if they're writing something, if they're giving a speech, if they're doing, a project or whatever it might be.
But they wouldn't have to embrace a faith if they chose not to.
Correct, absolutely.
Okay. I just want to make sure, just get this stuff on the record, because people will question and wonder about it. All right, well, we've got a few other things to cover that we still have time for. In fact, there are two more issues: charter schools and private school vouchers. Very hot issues. We'll find out where Michelle stands on those next. Welcome back to Swing State. I'm Fox 8 senior political reporter Bob Buckley, and we're talking with the Republican nominee for Superintendent of Public Instruction, Michelle Morrow. And one of the hot issues anytime I talk about schools with folks out there is charter schools. A lot of people are against them who are within the public school community. What is your stance? There are about 211 of them now, serving about 10% of the state's students in the state. Do we have too many, too few? What do you want to see happen going forward?
I would like to see public education just in general be the best in the nation, and that means it's with public schools and with charter schools. What I see is healthy competition always gives you the best product at the best price. And so if we have public schools that are not meeting the needs of students, there should be somewhere that parents can have an opportunity to go and send their kids.
Some of the critics, though, of public charters, these are people who are heavy advocates of general public schools. They don't think charters should exist. Many others in the public schools grudgingly accept them. They're claiming they're a drain on public school resources. But if you look at the funding, charter schools get $8,065 per pupil. Traditional public schools get $8,995. These are the latest figures we could find. So that's a little more than 10% more going to traditional public schools. Should they be funded? I think the big difference is charters don't get any capital money.
Right.
Money for their buildings.
Yes, that is true. And the other thing is charters don't get any money up front until they've already gone through the processes of getting their licensure in order to be able to function. So they, right before a school year starts, so they have to have everything backloaded in order to have the building and all of the structure and infrastructure.
Should that change?
No, I think right now it's working well. What I would like to see is I'd like to see, just a healthy competition. I think, as I said before, if our public schools are the best option, then people are going to want to be staying there. And that is going to, and then you can still have charters if people want to have a smaller classroom size, or if it's something that's more specific to a STEM class or whatever it might be, right? Then you really do have more choice if you have a lot of great options.
I do hear a lot of critics of charters say, well, who knows if they're any good? There's no accountability. We have figures on that too. Charter schools, 53 of 195 of them, that when the last time they're all tested, there were 195, were graded A or B. And this is graded by the Department of Public Instruction, not by themselves. And that's a little more than 27%. Traditional publics, 591 out of 2595 graded A or B. That's 22.8. So on average, charter schools appear to be performing better. I don't know if that rings anything with you.
Yep.
All right, let's look at, though, there's been anecdotal evidence, and now we have some hard evidence about schools in general and how COVID may have destroyed not just students' ability to be in person, but their learning and the standards we hold them to. How students' test scores compared with standardized proficiency testing. So this idea is grade inflation.
Right.
In 2019, 54% of North Carolina students earned an A or a B in math, but only 54% scored as proficient. So that matches up as it should.
Yes.
If you get an A or B, you're probably proficient. That's our basic standard. So by 2022, though, 51% were earning an A or B in math, but the proficiency fell to 43%. That's a nearly 15% drop, although it's 8 percentage points. That's about 15% of the total.
Right.
What are you seeing? Is there grade inflation? Do we need to talk to our schools about this?
Yes, I do believe, and I have heard from teachers throughout the state that there really is a we can see this because there's a lot of pressure to push the child along and to push them along, and so that the numbers look good so that we can get our funding, whether it's from state or from federal funding. And I think this is one of the reasons why I have even been asking teachers specifically, and I've asked the General Assembly members, if we don't need to go to, in our end of grade tests, should we be, for the next several years, using a nationalized test and make that be what we're creating our standards for, rather than rewriting our end of grade tests at a state level, and then we're making our standards fit what we're wanting our end of grade tests to be, because clearly our end of grade tests, right, are not keeping up with what is expected on the national level.
Right. The other big hot issue, private school vouchers. The state just expanded the program, adding in nearly $500 million to fund it for 72,000 vouchers. Good idea?
I think it's a great idea to give parents a choice. I do think that we are going to run into an issue, because right now, I do not believe that we have the supply to meet the demand, even for those figures that are handing out, because most private schools have a 2 or a 3 year wait list, and charter schools are very similar. And there are many districts within North Carolina that don't even have a charter school offer.
But they'll catch up, and that takes time to expand.
It will take time.
But here's the point that I think some people have that is valid. They removed the income cap, the cap on this, which I don't quite understand. So now very wealthy families can take advantage of this. The argument might be, well, they're paying taxes too, but is this really smart for us to have unlimited income? Anyone can be. It was designed to be for the poorest families in the worst schools. Right,
I understand that, and I can see that point, and I have not gone through those numbers to determine that, but I do think you're exactly right. I think we need to make sure that we are first of all focusing on the students whose parents do not have the monetary ability to send them to a private school if there should be availability.
Or the wealthier families tend to live in the best school districts as well, so they already have an advantage.
I will say, to your point, a lot of families are told that they're being capped so they can't go to the schools that are within their districts. And that has happened repeatedly. As I was running for school board, I run into very many families. So for instance, you might buy, this happened in Western Cary, you buy a house, it's a $700,000 home, and it looks like you're slotted to these specific elementary, middle, and high school. But when you get there and you go to enroll your child, they say, I'm sorry, the school has been capped. And so we're going to send you somewhere else.
We bought our house to be in a school district, and fortunately worked out for it. Only a few seconds, but I have to ask you, we have the state's #1 public school right here in Guilford County, the Early College at Guilford. Of course, they select among the finest students in the area, but is there anything from a school like the Early College that we can scale to all schools?
Absolutely. I have actually met with several schools that are broadening their CTE program, and I think that we really need to look at getting that into every single district and multiple times. I think we need to give students some really hands-on opportunities in high school to study things that they love, and with the potential of following a career in that in the future.
Terrific. All right, that is it for tonight. Please tune in or set your DVR to record Swing State each week to get the kind of in-depth look at the key issues that shape our community. See you next time.